bit louder.
Uh,
So does everyone in here speak up when you're talking?
Okay, so we'll have to speak up. Okay, so my name is Tim Wallace. I'm Executive Director of Nuclear Ban, and I'm the coordinator of the Warheads to Windmills Coalition in the US. And I want to welcome you all to this event. We're very excited to have some people from, here's Tamara, some people in Dubai joining us, as well as colleagues here at the TPNW in New York. And we've got also people watching on live stream. So please speak up. This room is magic. The cameras and the microphones automatically go to whoever's speaking, supposedly. So if you cough, it'll suddenly zoom in on you. I want to just say a couple words about Warheads to Windmills, which is hosting this event. We're a coalition of organizations, including environmental, peace, climate, and anti-militarist and anti-nuclear organizations that want to work together to address these two existential threats to humanity. And how can we learn from each other? How can we share experiences? How can we build on the different work of the different organizations and maybe share even tactics and strategies? And so this is our first real event as a coalition to, you're welcome. We're very excited to use this opportunity with these two conferences that are happening at the same time to learn from each other and share some experiences. So our goals are, as I said, to share some experiences of what's going on here in the TPNW meeting, which has already been going for most of this week already, and many of you have been taking part in different events and sessions of the TPNW. With Dubai, the COP28 in Dubai is just starting, so we may have some information about the first day, but really we're sort of passing the torch. We're going to talk about what's been happening, and they're going to talk about what's going to be happening. And I hope we can, I know we'll all learn something about that. And hopefully we can come away from this with some ideas for how we can work more proactively and more effectively together and build a common movement for our survival. So we're gonna have six groups of 6 pairs on the screen talking about 5 minutes each or 10 minutes per pair about what's going on in the two places and what they want to share with us. And then we'll open it up for discussion. And we've got a team of people monitoring the live stream. So people who aren't in this room can also participate. We'll monitor the chat and we'll try to involve them in the questions of the discussion. So is everybody good? If you have a computer, you just need to make sure you have the sound completely off, because apparently it picks up sound off the computer. So we do have a special guest from the Tuvalu mission to the United Nations. I don't know if you can hear me, Tanyela. If you could unmute and just say a word. I don't know if your colleague has been able to get on. I'm just looking. I don't see Gemma. Is she here? Are you there?
Thanks. Thanks, Timon. I hope I am audible.
Can
you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Can you share your camera or not?
There you are.
Okay. Welcome. Thank you.
So, yeah, thank you. And I'm joining you from the office. I don't seem to see my colleague from Dubai, so I hope I can make some significant contribution to this meeting. Thank you for having me.
Okay, well, we'll come back to you if we can get your colleague on the line, and we'll jump ahead because we have with us Melissa Park, Executive Director of ICANN, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, And with her, we have Rebecca Burns. I don't know, Rebecca, what your official title is, but you're with the fossil fuel nuclear non-proliferation initiative in Dubai. And we're very excited, especially to hear about how the fossil fuel treaty campaign can link up with the TPNW and with the work of ICANN, because these are two international efforts to really change the conversation about not just nuclear weapons, but also fossil fuels. Rebecca, are you able to share your screen?
Hi, everyone. Yes, hi. Lovely to see you all. Thank you very much for having me. Hopefully you can see and hear me okay.
Yes, we got you. Thank you.
Perfect. Should I kick off first?
Yes, please kick off.
Excellent. Oh, thank you very much. No, it's a pleasure to be here, and it's fantastic to make this connection. I think, particularly given that I work for an initiative which has really learned so much from all of you who've worked in the nuclear movement and worked towards establishing the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons a few years ago. So it's a real honor to be here today. I am calling in from Dubai at the COP28. I'm going to speak primarily about what the goals of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative are here in the negotiation space, which aren't necessarily linked directly to the COP28 process, although some of it is. Some of it's how we use this venue, given the opportunity of sort of bringing together everyone in the world on climate. But I thought if it's useful, I might just spend, just very briefly outline who we are and what we do. So the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative, aside from being quite a mouthful, is a global civil society and government-led initiative towards new international governance on the supply side of fossil fuels. So the idea isn't to develop a treaty that would replace the Paris Agreement, because obviously the Paris Agreement plays a really important role in setting the bar for climate action with the 1.5-degree temperature goal, with nationally determined contributions that require countries to set and then monitor their emissions targets. But what Paris doesn't do is address the production and extraction of fossil fuels, which contribute to 86% of the carbon dioxide emissions that Paris is trying to address. So we've ended up in a situation where countries are essentially undermining their own climate efforts by continuing to extract fossil fuels at a rate that's essentially double what we can afford to extract by 2030. So the idea of the Fossil Fuel Treaty is a complementary initiative. It would help complement and implement Paris. It currently has 2,500 organizations that have endorsed the call for a fossil fuel treaty, 101 Nobel laureates, over 3,000 scientists and academics, 100 cities and subnational governments, the World Health Organization, the European Parliament, and 8 governments across 3 continents. And it's a real pleasure to see Kepa on this call, who is working for the Tuvalu mission, because Tuvalu has really been championing the fossil fuel treaty proposal alongside Vanuatu. And the proposal is structured around 3 core pillars, which in many ways were inspired and adapted from the pillars of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So non-proliferation being equivalent to ending the expansion of fossil fuel production, disarmament or phasing out existing fossil fuel production. And instead of peaceful use, the 3rd pillar is around a global just transition from fossil fuels that includes a call for financial and technical support, particularly for those who are either their economies or their energy systems are currently dependent on fossil fuels. But while we took inspiration from the nuclear NPT for our name as a framing tactic, essentially, we do expect or hope that the treaty, the fossil fuel treaty, would be more in line with the TPNW in how it's actually established, rather than a universal lowest common denominator type treaty. We're looking for something that's more ambitious and ratified by a majority of countries that will help exert pressure on major producer states, but not necessarily expecting them to be in the room. Which is why being here in the UNFCCC is interesting, because the UNFCCC, as you might be aware, is a consensus-based decision-making process where all countries essentially have a veto power in potentially preventing proposals from going ahead. So that's why the Paris Agreement is structured around nationally determined contributions, where countries get to choose their level of commitment, because there was an inability to set top-down emissions reduction targets. So we aren't aiming to establish a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty under the UNFCCC. Instead, what we're doing is using the UNFCCC as a venue for pushing this agenda forward. So just briefly, some of our expectations and hopes for COP28. The first is that as an initiative, we're really hoping to use this space for momentum building. So of course, for 2 weeks every year, the eyes of the world's media and thought leaders are on these climate negotiations. So it's an opportunity to really shine a light on the need for increased governance on fossil fuels. So there's a lot of events happening, a lot of sort of media exercise happening over the next couple of weeks. There's also a high-level event that Tuvalu and Vanuatu are hosting on the 2nd of December, which will have several heads of state, the leaders of the World Health Organization, the UN Environment Programme, and several other high-level speakers, and will include a major announcement of a new country joining the club of countries currently supporting the treaty. So that's very exciting. The COP is also a space for dialogue. So there's a lot of bilateral meetings happening, and there will be a 5th high-level dialogue on international governance on fossil fuels that will be held in the margins of the COP next week. And so bringing together countries in a closed-door setting to start to talk about what this new treaty could look like. And then our team is also trying to engage in a bit of a normative shift around governance on fossil fuels. And part of the way we do that is actually engaging in the negotiations themselves. We don't expect that COP28 will come up with, a call for a new fossil fuel treaty. Of course, that won't happen in this space. But what we can do is plant the seeds and try to at least set the bar for, countries starting to think about a fossil fuel phase out. So you might be aware that that's been the contentious issue of the COPs for the last couple of years. At this COP, the global stocktake is the big issue. It's the first time that the global stocktake has taken place. And the goal of the treaty initiative and of many who are working in, across civil society and countries that are pushing for language on fossil fuel phase out is to have recognition in the text of the global stocktake that there needs to be a phase out of all fossil fuels, not just of coal like we've seen in the past, and not just a phase down, but a full phase out. So there will be quite a lot of energy over the next couple of weeks, particularly around the global stocktake and trying to have that text recognised, as well as some of the other agenda items like the Just Transition Work Programme and the Mitigation Work Programme, trying to ensure that there is space within the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement, recognising the need to phase out fossil fuels to help create a mandate then for further work and further governance, and hopefully at some point in another venue, a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. So I hope that gives a flavour of what we're all about and our goals, and I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That was fantastic, very interesting. And I hope we'll be able to have more conversation about that. And but we'll just pass it on to Melissa Park from ICANN to talk about how that might connect to TPNW.
Sure, thank you.
You have to speak up.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me, Rebecca? Nice to see you. You'll have all known that the doomsday clock this year was set at 90 seconds to midnight, based on the twin existential threats of nuclear weapons and climate. The fact that the meeting of states parties to the nuclear ban treaty is happening at the same time as the meeting on the climate in the UAE highlights the multiple threats that humanity is facing that demand urgent action. And we've got nuclear weapons, the risk that nuclear weapons could be used is at the highest it's ever been. The acceleration of climate change and its devastating impacts is obvious to everybody. And also that has an impact on, increases the risk of nuclear war. The acceleration of the extinction of animals and plants threatens nature and its ability to support human life. And of course, nuclear weapons affect threaten all species. So there are in fact three existential threats that humanity is facing, the Earth is facing right now, And I tend to talk about the climate crisis as the environmental crisis to encompass the species biodiversity loss, which is just as important as climate and needs to be addressed. And all of these threats need to be addressed simultaneously. They are all existential. And it's I think really important to note that the Pacific Islands, as an example, they are suffering from the colonial legacy of nuclear weapons testing. They're also suffering from the legacy of emissions from the global north that is causing rising sea levels and threatening their very survival. And they're also having to deal with the ongoing risk of increased militarization, including potential nuclear war in the region. And that's just an example of how all of these things are coming together all at the same time. We also have a commonality in that the lobby groups and the forces arraigned against our two treaties are enormous. Got the fossil fuel lobby, and you've got the arms industry, and both of them are so powerful. And so I think it's a really great approach that we're all taking in wanting to see international law as the standard by which countries and peoples have to abide, and using people power and people at all levels, parliamentarians, local governments, civil society in general. I wanted to also note the importance of us taking our issue of nuclear weapons out of the silo of security and defence. Nuclear weapons affect everyone and everything, and we all have a stake in this. All of our lives are at risk, and it's obviously the same on the climate as well. And we all have a say. We should all have a say, and that's what the TPNW does. It gives a voice to countries and peoples who've traditionally been disenfranchised and sidelined. It gives a powerful voice, and I'm sure that's what will happen when your treaty gets up as well. I just wanted to, another comment to make about this is the billions that are being spent on modernising and expanding nuclear weapons arsenals, that nuclear armed states say that they are only using as a deterrent and therefore will never be used militarily. So they're completely useless. Could be spent on healing our environment and providing clean jobs, among other things. So there's a whole lot of areas, and I would just want to touch on another issue. I'm sorry, I hope I'm not coming down with something. In medical experts this year called for, in 150 medical journals around the world, put out a joint press release calling for urgent action to eliminate nuclear weapons as a public health priority. And they cited the Nature Food study, which was published last year, which found that even a limited nuclear war, say between Pakistan and India, could kill 120 million people outright, and then cause global climate disruption, whereby the soot from the firestorms from the nuclear weapons go into the stratosphere, circle the globe. They can't be rained out that high up, and then they blocks out the sunlight and causes mass crop failure and mass starvation. So even a limited nuclear war would kill at least 2 billion people, not to mention other life on Earth. A major nuclear war, say between Russia and the US, they estimate would kill at least 5.5 billion and put in jeopardy all life on Earth. And this is what's called a nuclear winter. So the map, the global map you'd see, instead of being all red from climate heating, would be all blue from global cooling. And it would be where you would see at least a drop of 9 degrees Celsius, an average drop. And as we know, the effects from a 2 degrees temperature rise in warming, you can imagine what impact such a global drop in temperature would have. And so this is just another aspect, I mean, a very compelling aspect, I think, nuclear winter. It's not just about the nuclear armed states and their enemies and the regions where there might be a nuclear war. It's about all life on Earth being impacted by nuclear weapons. And that's why it has to, it's urgent that we act on it, and we are acting on it through this treaty. This treaty is bringing together, governments, civil society, businesses, and because everyone has a right to get involved in this effort to eliminate nuclear weapons and to tackle climate change. So I think I'll stop there and
Okay, well, thank you so much.
I might see if my colleague Susie has anything to add.
I'm going to tell me later.
Okay.
We'll have a
Okay.
chance to have more
Yeah.
discussion, and we'll just keep moving. But thank you so much, Melissa. And as you pointed out, we're all talking about climate here, whether it's heating to the point where human life becomes impossible, or whether it's cooling as a result of climate, as a result of nuclear winter. We've got to keep our climate as it is. That's our message there. So thank you so much, both of you, and I'm hoping you can both stick around for the questions and discussions. But we'll keep moving along. We have 4 more pairs of campaigners and activists to share their thoughts and experiences from the 2 events. And the next is Peace Boat, and we've got Molly Razan, is that how you pronounce it? Okay, here in New York, and we've got Emily McGlone in Dubai, and they've got some slides to share. And over to you, how you want to do it. Okay, so Emily's starting.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. Hello from Dubai. Thank you very much to everybody who's organizing in New York. Emily McGlone, Director of Peace Boat US, normally based in New York City, and today really taking over some of the time here of our delegation in Dubai. So thank you for organizing. This is my 4th time at COP, leading our delegation here. And just to give a little bit of context, many of you know Peace Boat as an organization. If you want to go to the next slide, we can just kind of go through a little bit together. But as our ship, the Peace Boat, is sailing around the world, we're visiting around 100 countries during our global voyages for peace and sustainability. And you can see here from the map, the northern voyage and also the southern voyages visit so many island nations in remote areas of the world, where we're meeting with local communities really impacted not only by climate change, but of course also often by the nuclear fuel chain and by nuclear testing. So we've been visiting many of these communities and listening to those stories and testimonies of the effects of these issues. And you can go to the next slide, please. We also sail with the ICANN logo on the hull of our ship. So everywhere that we go, we are raising awareness for nuclear disarmament and bringing the voice of survivors also with us on these global voyages to share their testimonies. Next slide, please. And in 2008, we started the Hibakusha project, which really brings the survivors, especially from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, with us on board the ship. Peace Boat was started in Japan in 1983. And for that reason, we have a very special connection, obviously, to nuclear weapons and the effects of the nuclear bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And unfortunately, also in 2011, with the nuclear accident in Fukushima. So looking at nuclear energy. So for us, it's extremely important to make sure that the voices of the survivors are heard throughout the global voyages. Next slide, please. With our education model on the Peace Boat, we try to do at least these three main pillars, which is to understand the humanitarian aspects of the issue itself and develop a sense of empathy through the stories of the hibakusha, recognizing the threats and dangers that exist in the world today, which continue to increase every day, as we know, and learning the methods for taking action that facilitate disarmament. So empowering civil society and also working with governments and United Nations partners, as we also hold special consultative status with the UN. So really trying to bridge that gap. And on the next slide, we are trying to bring the voices as well from youth. And this is one inspiration that we had from the Hibakusha project, is really by learning about the testimonies of those who've experienced nuclear weapons. We also learned that many of the youth who are on the front lines of the climate crisis have similar stories. They are also in danger of becoming climate refugees, losing their homeland, and their stories have really been the ones to inspire us the most. So just like nuclear weapons, we believe that the climate crisis is not only a threat to humanity, but one that's impacted certain communities more than others. As we know, especially those who've experienced nuclear testing in island nations around the world, and those who are on the front line of the climate crisis are often the most vulnerable, just as Melissa was saying, those who are marginalized communities, remote areas, and which also tend to be indigenous communities or colonized areas of the world. Next slide, please. So for us here, especially at COP, I'm just going to speak a little bit more about what we're doing here. We have 7 youth leaders who are with us here in Dubai. We are bringing the voice of those from especially small island developing states to the front lines, sharing their stories and bringing their testimonies to COP as well, and letting everybody understand, especially for island nations who have been impacted by nuclear testing, but also really seeing the impacts of sea level rise. We're also announcing our launch of the Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development programs on the Peace Boat. This is the decade of ocean science right now from 2020 to 2030. So really trying to bridge that gap as well, and how the ocean connects us all and how those communities can share their stories together. And the next slide, please. We have more than 20 plus events taking place here in Dubai this week and next week as well, all the way till the 12th of December. And in each of these events, again, we're bringing in young leaders to share their experiences. So these are the kind of partnerships that we've created. Also working towards not only sharing their stories, but creating a future that will be more sustainable for all. So looking at 100% renewable energy, which of course does not include nuclear energy for us, and trying to work towards those goals here at COP together. And the next slide, please. And centering those voices also around capacity building, connections, empowering youth to take action, something that we'll have Molly speak a little bit more about, Youth for TPMW, but really making sure that we're centering the voices of affected communities and ensuring that they're involved in negotiations and discussions and have a seat at the table. Next slide, please. And unfortunately, there's been a lot of lobbying for nuclear energy at COP. It seems to be the voice of many people working towards climate solutions, believing that nuclear energy is a positive solution. And so a lot of our work is also going up to those communities, going up to those NGOs and sharing with them why this is not sustainable. So all kinds of advocacy around COP. This is a photo actually from COP27, where I found this appalling kind of display of action where organizations were dressing up as bananas and showing that, they believe that, a nutritious banana is what it says here on the sticker, has a higher level of radiation than, a nuclear power plant. These kind of ridiculous and outlandish activities that we find where people are really presenting this as, that nuclear energy is safe and just as safe as eating a banana. So, really trying to combat this at COP is quite challenging. So we're really every single day encountering so many people promoting nuclear energy. And so that's one of the big challenges. Next slide, please. And that brings us to our work, also the 2 MSPs. So I'm going to kind of pass it over to Molly, but our goal is really to continue raising the voices of the hibakusha, to continue working with youth, and to continue empowering, especially communities affected by nuclear testing. And then lastly, what's happening now also here with the Loss and Damage Fund. Today, as many of you heard from COP27, they announced the Loss and Damage Fund, but it was quite difficult for those communities to actually have a fund that works for everyone. And they announced today that they will use $260 million in pledges to ensure that the loss and damage fund does get distributed and does, work for local communities. So that is an advancement. We're trying to make progress, and we have 2 more weeks ahead of us. Today's the first day. So thank you all for organizing, and I'll pass the mic over to our youth representative, Molly Roseanne.
Great, thanks so much.
Well, thank you so much, Emily, for that. And yeah, so I'll just be talking about what we've been doing as Peace Boat this past week at 2MSP. So Peace Boat for many years has advocated and campaigned for a nuclear-free world and the abolition of nuclear weapons and nuclear power, as well as support for all survivors of the nuclear chain. Peace Boat also regularly travels on board the ship with Habakasha, as you saw with the Habakasha project, to share their testimonies at various events, both on and off the ship. These are the global voyages for the nuclear program, which was also what inspired the Ocean Climate Youth Ambassador Program. So those are very much linked for us. Next slide, please. Peace Boat works particularly with the TPNW through Article 6, victim assistance. For 2MSP, Peace Boat has been coordinating and supporting Habakasha throughout the conference, alongside with other organizations as part of Japan NGO networks. We actually are lucky enough to have 7 first-generation Habakasha with us in New York, and they've been going to different events throughout the week, and so we've had a big role in that. And Peace Boat staff have also been providing translation and interpretation for Habakasha at these events, and we're even asked to join at the general debates for the Habakasha translation. So that was really great for the staff members as well, who are actually at another event right now. So that's why they can't be here today. So throughout the week so far, we've hosted a variety of events, one of which being our Affected Communities Breakfast, which brought together survivors from Japan, Korea, Kazakhstan, the Pacific, and the US. And yesterday we held an event on disarmament and peace building in Northeast Asia. Peace and reconciliation in Northeast Asia has been a priority of Peace Boat since our establishment, and we coordinate various related campaigns in Japan and in the region. Using the voyages and grassroots connections, Peace Boat provides a platform for dialogue between citizens of Northeast Asia on issues including history education, nuclear disarmament, and territorial disputes, working to overcome historical conflicts in order to build a peaceful future for the region. And so right after this, where all of my colleagues are at right now, we are hosting a nuclear survivors forum for Habakasha and any survivors of nuclear testing or use. And this forum is a really great opportunity to gather voices of nuclear survivors from around the world and deliver their calls for the total elimination of nuclear weapons, as well as the full recognition of their human rights and dignity. This forum, in addition to the Affected Community Breakfasts, are meant to strengthen the network among nuclear survivors and discuss priorities, expectations, and plans for the future. So we know how important it is to center these voices, as Emily had mentioned, at conferences like COP28 and 2MSP, in the experience of people impacted by these issues. So at both conferences, we're hosting many events that focus on their voices and also building connections between the people that have the shared experiences. And all of this goes towards Peace Boat's goal of creating a peaceful and sustainable world. Thank you so much.
Much, both of you. I hope we could stay for more discussion, but that was terrific, and we can clearly see some of the linkages between the affected communities work, bringing the Habakasha as well as people from the Pacific Islands, the links about the fund they were talking about, and victim assistance again, and those developments on both sides. So that was great. Thank you so much. We'll keep moving right along so we can have some more time for discussion. So we've got next up is Cheryl Spencer, and who's with Women's International League for Peace and Freedom here in New York. And with her is Katrin Geyer, who's with the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom in Dubai. And I don't know if you discussed who's going to go first. Okay, so Katrin, please.
Hello, everyone. Hi, good evening from Dubai. It's really great to be here, and it's really interesting to listen to all of the speakers' reflections so far. So I'll be speaking a little bit about what WILF's objectives and approaches are for COP28. So overall, WILP's approach is really, we really want to forge a narrative shift for demilitarization to be considered and included as an essential component for climate justice. And this year's COP presents really an unprecedented opportunity for a feminist peace organization like WILP, because for the first time ever, the Climate Summit hosts a thematic day on peace on the 3rd of December. And as part of that, the presidency of this year's COP has led the adoption of a peace declaration. However, the declaration exclusively focuses on the need to channel more financial support to countries and communities that are affected by both conflict and the climate crisis. And of course, this is absolutely essential. But this very narrow focus completely neglects one of the root causes of both the climate crisis and conflict, and that is rampant militarization. So while militarism really continues to be the elephant in the climate room, at least amongst high-level negotiators, we can really see a growing momentum across movements that are rallying around demilitarization. And this year's Peace Day on the 3rd of December will provide a unique opportunity to continue to build on that. And just to say that one of the concrete messaging that we're using for COP on the links between the climate crisis and militarization is a narrative that's been long-standing in the humanitarian disarmament community, and Melissa also just mentioned it. And that is precisely that every dollar that's spent on the military takes away resources from both real human security, but also from tackling the climate crisis. And just to give you one really striking fact, between 2013 and 2021, the world's wealthiest nations were spending 30 times more on military power than on tackling the climate crisis. And there's many other angles around militarism and the climate crisis that we're sharing in our messaging at COP, but I won't go further into detail now because I only have 5 minutes. I just want to use the remaining time to speak a little bit more about our WILP's specific approach at this year's COP, that much of it, of which we use and apply a lot also in the anti-nuclear space. So I think what's unique about WILP's approaches in both the nuclear and climate space is our feminist analysis of militarism and how it connects to the obstacles for nuclear abolition as well as fossil fuel abolition. So from a feminist perspective, militarism is underpinned by a patriarchal system that has normalized the use of military means, violence, and dominance to address conflict and instability. And patriarchy also manifests in how security is conceptualized, the privilege afforded to the military by political systems, and also the limited scrutiny of military spending and military responses, even when they fail to deliver on their promises. And so we really see these dynamics play out, as you all know, in the nuclear weapons space, but we also see it in the climate space. And it's also really interesting to read some of the work of feminist scholars that have described the heavily male-dominated fossil fuel industries and what's been described as a male attachment to fossil fuels as petrobromance. And so there are many synergies in terms of how patriarchy, along with other factors, is posing obstacles to both nuclear abolition as well as fossil fuel abolition. Another way that WILP is working in both the nuclear and climate space is through coalitions and movement building. So WILP is part of the steering group of ICANN in the nuclear space, and in the climate space, we're part of the Women and Gender Constituency, the Climate Action Network, as well as the Fossil Fuel Treaty Campaign that Rebecca just presented. And especially with the Fossil Fuel Treaty Campaign, we see that the Fossil Fuel Treaty could really be an important climate tool for peace because of the extraction and use of fossil fuels and how it's been shown to correlate with heightened risks of war and conflict. Another crucial aspect of how we're working in the climate space is that we really want to amplify the perspectives, the lived experiences, and also the solutions of those most affected by the intersecting crises of militarization and the climate crisis. And this is why this year, with COP taking place in Dubai, we're supporting the participation of 3 peace activists from Yemen and Syria. In terms of concrete activities that we have planned for COP28, I will just name a few examples. Next slide, please. So we're hosting one official side event on demilitarization, which will take place on the 4th of December. And we'll also be hosting a few other events that are taking place in pavilions, from the Women and Gender constituency to the SDG pavilion. All of these events have the aim to really highlight the connections between demilitarization and climate justice. And WILF has also launched a working group on demilitarization, peace, and climate justice within the Women and Gender constituency this year. And we will be meeting and strategizing and hopefully also planning a powerful 30-minute action with those that are COP in person. So these are just a few of the activities that we have planned. Over to Cheryl, please.
So over to you, Cheryl.
Bring up my, yes.
You have to speak up.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
So good day, good evening. I'm Cheryl Spencer. I'm a co-chair of the Disarm End Wars Committee of WILF US. And Catherine gave you a nice introduction to WILF and our values. We have a delegation of 3 Disarm committee members here. And one of our several campaigns that our committee works on is to get the United States to ratify the TPNW. So we are interested in what is called the universalization article of the treaty. It is Article 12. And I found the interpretation of the International Committee of the Red Cross of this aim to get more states to ratify the TPNW the most useful to our activities. I photographed 3 of the International Committee of the Red Cross slides when he was, one of their reps was talking about it. So he says, and I agree, that we must shape the narrative of both the nuclear weapon risk and the fossil fuel bad effects. And the narrative around the nuclear weapons is the humanitarian considerations that we must make sure that the world understands, and this is what underpins the TPNW, is the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons, the whole enterprise, not just exploding them, but extracting the uranium, getting the items built, and then they could be used. Okay, so that is one of the reasons we need to have the TPNW. I have the next slide. So how do we actually spread these ideas and norms of the TPNW? He says to other fora, I take that as spreading them to the general public. And so the second one is this thing called universalization. Sorry. And he says, it's not just getting this other states to sign the TPNW, but actually spreading these norms to other fora and other contexts, which of course is the climate crisis. So the next slide, please. So here are 5 ways that he thinks we can deal with spreading these norms and ideas to other places. We are concentrating in WILF on numbers 2, 3, and 4. So this public health issue, which Melissa mentioned earlier. So it was not since 1987 has anybody really looked at the difference, the reasons for the difference in how women and girls suffer from radiation. So we suffer more medical consequences than men and boys if we are subjected to ionizing radiation. And what's clear is there needs to be more research on this to find the reasons for this. The statistics are very clear, but why it is that women and girls suffer more is one of the things. So one of the things we hope will be happening is that we will update this WHO report.
The next thing, our committee is working on divestment, okay? So this is, what do we mean by divestment? We mean we get institutions to remove nuclear weapons manufacturing companies from their investment portfolios, okay? We say that investing in nuclear weapons is a risky investment. Investing people hate high risk things in their portfolio. So the climate activists, I think, will be doing the same thing. They should be getting institutions to divest from fossil fuel companies, both the coal extraction, the coal processing, and then all the oil. And people are already doing that. There are institutions divesting from fossil fuels. So I think the number 4 is very interesting. So she talked about what Wolf is doing. So I think climate, and this is what the gentleman said, should copy what we have done with the International Court of Justice, right? So we got an advisory, we, the anti-nuclear people, got an advisory opinion about nuclear weapons breaking humanitarian law because they ignore the human right to life, which is in the Charter of the UN. In a similar fashion, we should get, the states should say to the International Court of Justice, would you please have another advisory opinion, which is states must protect the climate system and mitigate climate change, otherwise many humans will die. Okay, so that would be a parallel thing to what has already happened. So lastly, I have left some handouts in the conference room A, which is our conference room, for you to take home, things that we'd like you to know about. In particular, this trifold about all the different ways we can deal with the TPNW. So in conclusion, I will say that we've learned a lot about the TPNW during the 2 MSP, and we will go back to our hometowns inspired to continue the struggle to get the TPNW ratified by the United States. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Cheryl, and thank you, Katrin. We've got some more themes coming through about the underpinning patriarchy and the reasons for both the fossil fuel and the nuclear weapons, and the focus on humanitarian, people-centered, approaches, and divestment, which is clearly happening at both ends. And I'm sure there's more we can do on the idea of fossil and fissile divestment campaigns. So thank you so much. We'll keep moving on. We have our two more panels, two more pairs. The next one is with Sean Connor, who's here from the International Peace Bureau, and he's online with Tamara Lawrence, is that right? Who is Voice of Women and WILF, is that right? You're both part of the climate and militarism group, so you can maybe explain what that is, or who's going first?
I think Tamara will go first.
Okay, great. Sorry.
Am I good to go now? Can you hear me?
Good to go. Yes,
okay, great. Good evening, everyone from Dubai. It's really nice to be with you all and to hear the other panelists. We have the same struggle, and so it's really great to be in solidarity and to support one another. It's just so critical. So my name's Tamara Lawrence. I'm on the Climate Action Network Canada, CANRAC, civil society delegation. And on this delegation, I'm representing the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace and the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom Canada that are members of CANRAC. And I'm coming to COP28 to bring the messages of peace for climate justice, demilitarize, decarbonize, decolonize, cutting military spending for climate finance, NATO is a threat to people and the planet, and also to cancel the F-35 warplanes, stop the wars, stop the warming. So I've brought buttons and banners and pins and handouts, and I am doing advocacy with activists and with with groups as I can. I'm doing a couple of media interviews and webinars. As you heard from Katrin, the UAE president has put peace on the thematic program for December 3rd. But what was disappointing, in my opinion, is at today's opening plenary, peace was not mentioned once. I did not hear the words peace mentioned at all. So it really is not a priority in the climate space, which is so disappointing. As well, another unfortunate news is that the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has announced that he will be at the Leaders Summit tomorrow. So NATO has had a growing, creeping presence at the Conference of the Parties, which I find very troubling. So the first time a NATO Secretary General came to a COP was in Glasgow in 2021. And it was only in 2023 in Madrid that NATO put climate as part of its strategic concept, but NATO is really militarizing climate change. And so this is something that I'm trying to push back on, because we have to recognize, friends, that it's NATO's wars and fossil fuel powered militarism over the past 25 years that has completely derailed the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement. We simply cannot meet the Paris Agreement targets by 2030 by maintaining NATO's high-level militarism. And I would like to show my slides if I can really quickly. Oh, it's been disabled. That's okay. Well, one of the key priorities at the COP is climate finance. Climate finance came up many times, by delegates today in the opening plenary. It's a top priority because without climate finance, we are not going to achieve our adaptation goals and our mitigation goals. However, countries are saying, where are we going to get the money for climate finance? We can't seem to, find adequate funding. But since the Paris Agreement in 2015, the 31 countries of NATO have increased their military spending by over $200 billion annually. So these rich countries have failed to meet the $100 billion pledge for climate finance. But in the past, the past 8 years, they have increased their military spending by more than this amount. So you can see in the slides here, in 2015, military spending $896 billion, and it has gone up to $1.2 trillion. And NATO, of course, accounts for 60% of global military spending. I want to close by talking very quickly about Canada. Canada, of course, is not sending a delegation to observe the second meeting of the parties for the TPNW because of our membership in NATO. And Canada has also failed to meet every single target under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. 2 weeks ago, our Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development under the Office of the Auditor General said that Canada's carbon emissions are continuing to rise, and we are not on track to meet our Paris Agreement. The other thing that I want to mention to you is that Canada announced that it is going to be hosting the NATO Center of Excellence for Climate and Security in Montreal, and we're expecting this new center to be open sometime in the next couple of months. But this is really a greenwashing exercise. So, friends, I just want to encourage you to support the work that we're doing to call attention to NATO's nefarious role in derailing the Paris Agreement and also in preventing us to achieve a nuclear disarmament. We simply can't move from weapons to windmills with NATO's continued existence. So it's so critical for us to abolish the alliance. Thanks very much.
We're running a bit behind, but please share with us.
I'll be quick as possible here. Yeah, thank you so much, Tamara, for that as well. And maybe just to add to that, we had just yesterday the German delegation who openly said in front of the open session that they also will not join the TPNW at any point in the future, at least any foreseeable point, due to their NATO commitments. So this is across the NATO alliance, something that we are seeing. Maybe just beyond that, some of the work we've been doing at the International Peace Bureau during this week here, but also more broadly, has been focused on the shifting geopolitical landscape that we see on the global level. There's much buzz this weekend and beyond about the rise of China, challenges to NATO, whether it be the war in Ukraine, the war we're seeing right now in the Middle East, the Francophone African countries' coups against the powers that were in place there. And much further beyond, of course. So we've been devoting a lot of attention to how these changes are occurring, the opportunities that can come with these changes, with a rising, stronger voice of the Global South, many of the countries who have signed on to the TPNW already, but also alliances such as the BRICS alliance, which of course includes some nuclear powered countries and many others who are not nuclear powered. Of course, there is the commitment under the TPNW, the positive obligation to convince others to join in the effort too. So there are many opportunities here, but we also see a more increasingly volatile situation on the global stage. And I think it was last night we had a meeting on the urgency of disarmament was the name of it. And for those who attended, also one of the speakers very rightfully said, in the nuclear powered countries, we have either very strong authoritarian leading governments that are in power, several others that are moving more and more to that direction. And those who may still have more democratic systems in place, there are still factions in those countries that would wish otherwise and are pushing away, which again means less control over how nuclear weapons could be used in the future, less control over a climate shift. So in this increasingly difficult situation we find ourselves in, our work has focused majorly on the idea of common security. We worked last year with the International Trade Union Confederation and the Olof Palme International Center in Sweden to develop a report that adapts the original concept of common security that came around in the context of the 1980s Cold War to reflect the geopolitical situation that we see in the 21st century. It's a short report, and we are hoping to follow up on this report with regional reports, cooperating with partners on different themes. So if you're interested, I also have some handouts here for later. But just a couple basic principles of common security. The bottom line is that we cannot create security at the expense of our adversaries, but need to work with our adversaries to create security together. This also addresses the fact that many of the challenges we're facing nowadays, whether it be the use of nuclear weapons or climate change, are not limited to what is happening within a border. National security does not apply. But beyond that, we really need to define what security means with a big focus on human security at a whole level. And then beyond that, some of the essential points that you'll find in the report include that there can be no common security with nuclear weapons, and that we must work together to address climate change. So keep it nice and short with that.
We'll have time for more questions and discussion. So thank you so much. Clearly some themes coming out about NATO, both in the climate space and in the nuclear weapons space, and the obscene amounts of money that are going into military in general, but also nuclear weapons specifically, and how we need that money and those resources and those human resources as well as financial resources to address a lot of the climate issues. So we're on to our last panel, which is the IPPNW, International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. We've got Stella Ziegler in our room here at the TPNW, and we've got Kuria Harrison online from Dubai. Do we still? Yep. So who's gonna go first?
Yeah, I think there's one slide.
One slide, okay.
And choose the one that says 24. So 24? That's it. Hello, everyone. Good evening to Dubai. My name is Stella Ziegler. I'm a medical student from Austria, studying at the Medical Faculty of Charité in Berlin, in Germany. And I'm also the international student representative of IPW, and I worked with students internationally on different perspectives for medical piecework. We have so much to talk about, and I'm very glad that a few of the former speakers covered a few grounds, so I won't extend my time. But let me start with a small metaphor. Imagine you're a doctor in the emergency room. Doesn't matter if you are or not, just bear with me. A patient comes in with multi-organ failure. And for those who know what that means, maybe you'll think, oof, we might have to act a little fast. And for those who might not know what it means, you'll definitely see that this patient won't be doing well once you see this patient. So what do we do now? We send a team of doctors, we ask about the patient's history, we run all kinds of lab tests, and all the results will show this is an emergency, we should really act now. So we'll pack this patient, we'll take this patient to a room, to the intensive care station, we're running, and we're encountering a closed door. All the beds are taken, there's no space, and no one seems to hear our cries for help. Now, our patient is the world here, and we see what is happening. We know the data, scientists agree, it's, as you mentioned, 19 seconds to doomsday on the dooms clock. But what we are facing are closed doors. So why am I here? Why am I here as a medical student? Why do we care? Why do we have to care as a medical society? As Dr. Celine Dugu said fantastically yesterday in her statement, we as health professionals have the moral and professional obligation to treat and do no harm. The bombs in Hiroshima killed 90% of the doctors and destroyed 80% of the hospital infrastructure. Getting help from outside is impossible due to radiation exposure and all that the horrors that war entails. This can, of course, be translated to all kinds of wars, as well as climate disasters, such as fires or floods. And after all, what difference does it make when you can't cure the damage that has been done? We as health professionals play an essential and unique role in different aspects of both the climate crisis and nuclear scenarios. One, we provide acute help and support at the front lines. Also, we are scientists. We are conducting and publishing research, and it is our duty to demand data, maybe through a scientific advisory group, nuclear truth projects that we heard of so far, and as already was mentioned, an appeal to update the WHO report from the 80s. That is definitely far overdue. Also, in a negative way, science has used affected people for studies and experiments without consent or information. If you think as health as a whole, you will understand the whole scope of the humanitarian impacts in all aspects of life resulting in health or illness. Once the water, the food, the air, may be for intoxication, shortage, or due to natural disasters. There is destruction of environments, of medical infrastructure, not to mention physical and psychological trauma. We understand genetic damage, so that means not just short, but also long-term effects and consequences. We see, for example, right now, rising numbers in COPD, in asthma, and immunological deficiencies in children due to loss of biodiversity. Not just that, we also know from tests, nuclear weapon tests, or the two bombs that we have had experienced so far, fire, burning, compression of lungs, bleedings, radiation consequences, the list is long. The International Agency for Cancer Research published a study about women in French Polynesia, stating that they have the highest rates of thyroid cancer and myeloid leukemia worldwide. Not to mention all the trauma that is carried by miscarriages, infertility, babies with congenital physical malformations, and mental retardation. We as a medical society need to use our voices in this respected place in society and to be advocates. What we want to achieve here is to have a humanitarian focus in peace matters, to enable dialogue with people in the center of the conversation. All these aspects also fall under Article 6 and 7 of the TPNW. We have victim assistance that is not only financial, but also medical. We need health structures in that because there's no money in the world that can pay for a human life. And last but not least, we need to focus on prevention. IPNW's motto in the 80s was, we have to prevent what we cannot treat. And I think that still applies very much, maybe in the nuclear scenario or in the climate crisis. What have we done so far this week? Here are more than 40 people from the Medical Association represented. Often these meetings, I feel like, are very tactical. It's hard to enter from different points of society, but I think it's very important to also be present here because I'm used to doing more groundwork to encounter people who have suffered these consequences eye to eye in a very different setting than sitting at this table with you. But we need to tackle these crises from both fronts because I need to influence on what I have to, what I will, in the system that I will work in with people that I encounter. As I mentioned before, we want to enable dialogue, shift the perspective back to a humanitarian focus. And to know that neither nuclear weapons or the climate crisis know borders, which is why it is essential to work on these issues together, internationally, interprofessionally, and intersectionally. And maybe to come back to a little medical metaphor, we can't just treat the left toe when there's collateral trauma. A few of the intersections have already been mentioned between the climate crisis, conflict, war, armament, and that they all pose a threat to global health. I tried to pick this a little here. Maybe just a few additional points that I talked to Kuria about, who will then take over after my starting points. Not only has war a direct influence on climate, but also climate a direct influence on war. Both are existential threats, both are man-made and will affect the world for centuries, as it already does. And we can also see in all aspects of health, as I've mentioned before. Both are steered by a few, but will be suffered from by many. Both affect different parts of society in different ways, maybe geographically, gender, ethnicity, age, access to healthcare. But also both have very strong counter movements, and I really appreciate that we have different representatives from all kinds of movements present here today. And maybe my last statement for this is in both, change is a decision. And I think we all agree that both require action now. Thank you.
And we've now got Kuria on screen. Do you want to
Yes.
we still got more slides?
Hello everyone. Maybe the slides can just be moved to 2 slides ahead. So my name is Kuria Karime, and actually I'm not yet in Dubai. I'll be joining my colleagues in Dubai in about 1 day's time. I am currently in Nairobi, working as a physician in Nairobi, and at least with IPPNW, so far I can imagine the kind of work that we have been involved in the region. At least in the past, we have done campaigns on abolition of the uranium mining, especially close to our neighboring country in Kenya, which is Tanzania, and uranium mining in the region. So, especially when I talk about extraction industries in Africa. Extraction industries in Africa have come with a great cost to human life, great cost to human health. Especially when I think about a country like Congo. When I imagine here in Nairobi, the number of medical tourists that usually land on my desk at the accident and emergency, traveling all the way from Congo, suffering from a myriad of conditions, chronic conditions that are related to the industry of extraction, the extraction of cobalt, the extraction of uranium, and the extraction of whatever other minerals that are important in these regions of the world. When I think about, especially recently, the Africa Climate Summit, which was part of its kind in the region, there was a big push by companies that are involved in setting up nuclear power plants, selling their idea and their lure of nuclear energy as a solution to our future, for our green future. And what I imagine from this is that they're selling to us a dead end solution. Coming from a continent where the sun shines throughout the year, I would not imagine ourselves starting to get involved in nuclear energy. Thinking about our infrastructure as it were, and how we tend to have a lot of corruption, especially in setting up such infrastructure. I am saddened and afraid of the fact that people might end up cutting corners, setting up proper power plants, and now we have the dangers of nuclear meltdowns. And nuclear meltdowns, as my colleague has already mentioned, the effects of radiation on health, the effects of the effect of it on the environment and the future generations as well. So now, when I imagine that this is what is being sold to us as a solution for the future, we have to be against it. IPPNW Kenya and IPPNW as a whole stand against it, and stand against the extractivism and extraction industries that are promoted in the region. I would not imagine the same kind of instruction where unsafe practices are carried out in this particular chain of uranium mining, from extraction to transportation to use and even disposal. I would not imagine that moving into the future, this is what we are looking for. As it were already, the region is already being affected by the effects of climate change, a man-made disaster that we have brought upon ourselves from one extraction industry. And now we want to shift over and give a solution that is based on another extraction industry. And sometimes you end up thinking about how even newer technologies that are being promoted as the technologies of the future, for example, with battery technology. And as it were, already the paradox is battery technology is the future, but already it's an extraction intensive industry. And this same extraction industry that has met so much harm on the region is going to be the same solutions that are being brought about. So as I think about this, I wonder that in our pursuit to cleaner and green world, we should not trade one set of problems for another. Our goal is not just to shift in energy sources, but a transformation that prioritizes both the planet and its inhabitants. It is a delicate balance, I would imagine, but it is one that we must strike for the sake of the inhabitants of the Earth right now and the inhabitants of the Earth a century from now, our communities and the generations that are to come. On top of that, I would try our work also, I would imagine, we span across now what we term as a just energy transition. And in the concept of a just energy transition, I do feel like this is a somewhat of a topic where a lot of consideration must be had, where as we transform from one form of energy that is fossil fuels and we want to abolish it entirely, extraction of fossil fuels, and also extraction of uranium from the ground. As we transition from this, we must take into consideration that whatever solutions that are being brought about must also take into account the planet's health, the inhabitants' health, and the environment and the future generations. So now, I'd say, for example, for me, in conclusion, I would imagine as I head into COP, I am happy to hear that a lot of the points that I had ready myself to talk about, many of the beautiful people that I see around here have already touched on it. And I imagine great minds are working on it. I'm looking to network and join up with a lot of you that are already working on the same. And we can share as many ideas to COP28, those who are already there, looking forward to this. And we can discuss forward into the future and advocate. But as we move in, we should imagine that we're jumping from one man-made disaster, and we're really feeling the impacts of this one man-made disaster. Now we are having this other man-made potential disaster, and we keep threatening each other with the threat of nuclear war. And I keep seeing people bragging about how our ICBM is the best one, on the market. And I cannot imagine that as a physician, my primary directive is usually to safeguard life, safeguard health. I cannot imagine that all this much money is being spent to destroy life as we know. So moving into the future, I would imagine as a doctor, we push for research, push for this data to be sort of made available. How much the military is producing in greenhouse gases, how much actually is being spent and how much is being extracted, what is the environmental impact, what is the health impact, and the DNA of the current generation and the DNA of the future generations. This is something that we need to really focus on. And the perspective of IPPNW as physicians, we want to bring this to the table. Yeah, thank you very much.
Korea, I don't know if people could hear what he was saying, but it was a bit of a tricky internet there. But certainly your points about the just transition and the extractive industries, not only for fossil fuels, for instance, but also for cobalt and the other minerals that are needed for batteries for electric cars and so on. And we can't just solve one problem by creating another one. And these are all very much linked up between the climate crisis and the nuclear crisis. There's been a lot of talk about the nuclear, the supply chain or the value chain that goes all the way from mining the uranium and the impact on affected communities right through to the testing and so on. So thank you very much. We're very indebted to the medical profession for both these issues. They've been at the forefront because they're, as you said, science-based, which is another theme that keeps coming up in both spaces, and focusing on the health effects of on human beings and the humanitarian impacts of these things. And we've got to get back to that level of concern to solve either of these existential threats. So thanks everybody very much. We don't have as much time left for discussion as I hoped, but we have some. And we have people on the live stream with us who are able to send in the questions. But we'll go back and forth. I don't know how many there are.
There's about 30 on the live stream, but
30 questions.
30 people.
But how many questions?
No one's been putting in questions.
Okay, no questions yet. So those of you on the live stream, if you have some questions or comments, please put them in the chat and we'll try to get to them. If people have to leave for the next event, just slip away, but thanks for coming. And if there's any questions or comments from the floor, and if for whoever's left, we'll try to have one final round of everybody that's still on the screen and here to respond to some of the questions. So we'll take a few questions or comments, and then we'll have you respond, okay? So yes, sir. If you speak up as loud, the machine automatically goes to you somehow.
My name is Mohammed Haji from Morocco, researcher, climate activist. Through my modest expertise working with organizations, especially grassroots movements like Fridays for Future, I would recommend to establish a youth advisory group by ICANN that can work with youth advisory group to the UN Secretary General, and that can influence, the public. Since I have been working in the climate spaces, and I know, especially with big movements such as Fridays for Future, Greenpeace, they have, a lot of influence and they can reach public. And if we can work together with them, we can reach also the public and push also more states to join the treaty.
Okay, great, thanks. We'll just try to keep it brief. Comments or questions? Is there any from the?
Mara had a question.
Mara has
Yeah, but tomorrow is going to be able to. Well, you can ask again if you want tomorrow, but you're also going to be able to respond. Well, you can ask it directly tomorrow.
I was actually just wondering how NATO is being dealt with at the second meeting of the parties of the TPNW there in New York. What are you guys doing there around NATO? So
okay.
That's my question to you.
Are you keeping track of these questions so we can answer them as a group at the end? Okay, that's a good question. Okay, yeah, Mary.
Yeah, thank you. My question relates, I think, to the last presenter more than anything else. I'm Mary Yelnick with Pax Christi International, the Global Catholic Movement for Peace and Nonviolence. And our members in Congo, for example, are very, very conscious of what's happening to their country because of extractives of lithium and cobalt and rare earth. And I sit here taking pictures with my cell phone, and I looked at my Apple Watch. I'm just consumed with what are we doing to make our own personal choices. I'm not conscious, and this has been a real consciousness raising exercise for me here. We blame the governments, I'm lobbying for the TPMW, we blame NATO, we blame, how can we also take a closer look at our consumer preferences and become better stewards ourselves?
Okay, great. Any questions from the? Well, is there, I was gonna swap back and forth from the online, is there already? There aren't any, okay.
Okay. No, I was just thinking about, one of the things that this is amazing, and thank you so much for initiating this and bringing it together, because this is really a spectacular event. One of the key things about this is that it breaks down our traditional silos, right? Which I made a terrible joke about this morning, I apologize again. But it does, and Melissa talked about this a lot, the intersectionality across so many different issues. And so in that, I'm looking at, we're talking about climate, we're talking about nuclear disarmament, and underpinning all of it is human rights, right? And I think when it comes to human rights efforts and taking, for example, the ban treaty to the Human Rights Council, that has been done through the Universal Periodic Review, where there are questions put forward to states and when it comes to human rights. WILF has been one of the key actors in getting that, as well as the Quakers. And so I'm just wondering, like, as we kind of look at this, what are other mechanisms that we can kind of bring in that human rights lens as well? Because I think it affects all of these things. We had a decision on the human right to clean water. We had a general comment 18 on the right to life that recognized nuclear weapons threaten the right to life. So what other mechanisms can we kind of help in doing that to go wide as well as deep in our efforts to build a world that we enjoy? Thanks.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, thank you.
Throw it back to the panel.
Yeah, are there any other?
Or here, and we can take another round after.
Okay. Did you have a comment?
I think we should start with those four and then do another round after. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Then we'll have to.
I do agree with the fact that we should be working on human rights, but at the same time, human beings also have responsibilities too. And I think there is a parallel between what Susan says and what you're saying, that we have to sort of have a balance between individual rights and then individual responsibilities as consumers, as voters, as producers. And we are sort of, in a way, taking that out of the equation and only talking about rights. And people think that there are consumer rights, but there are no consumer responsibilities. And I agree with you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So let's do a round, because it's getting very, very late in Dubai. It's already 11 p.m. So since you're on the screen tomorrow, do you want to go first with or do you want to wait for someone to answer your question?
I would just like to hear what you guys are doing there. Yeah, I'm very grateful to you all for the activism that you're doing in New York. It's so important, but I'm just wondering about NATO. I really see NATO as a huge obstacle and to nuclear disarmament and climate justice. So I really love to hear how you're tackling that. Thanks.
Okay. Does somebody here want to tackle that question?
Go
ahead.
And then I'll hand over to you.
Okay.
Just to note that ICANN is always inviting every member state to every member state who is not a member state party to the treaty to observe the treaty. And there are a number of NATO state members who are observers. There's Germany, Belgium, Norway. I can't remember. Okay, sorry.
There are 35 states observing.
Yeah, but I don't know that all of them are NATO states. But anyway, those are key ones. And I think what would really be a great thing to come out of this meeting of states parties is the condemnation of the dangerous theory of nuclear deterrence, which NATO bases its policies on, and the dangerous practice of nuclear sharing. So those are going to be, I think, really significant outcomes from this meeting of states parties, and they will, it will erode, continue to erode the legitimacy of NATO's position. So I think it's working. Please, we're getting there. Yeah.
Thank you. You want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely, I think, the best point there to say, but maybe just a few comments on top from some of the events and conversations that I've had over the course of the week here. I think one that was quite interesting was the Northeast Asia Zone conversation that was held yesterday by Peace Boats. And there were discussions as well about NATO serving as a sort of nuclear umbrella for Japan and for South Korea, and the dangers that this poses in that region. And we see, I think, also in other regions of the world, similar fears on potentially the expansion of a nuclear umbrella or nuclear deterrence regime that needs to be challenged. So it is something, I think, that is not just limited to the NATO countries themselves, but also some of their allies around the world, specifically those that have a really strong movement, such as Japan, for nuclear abolition, that it needs to be challenged really at the wider lens that we need to do away with the nuclear umbrella. Now, I haven't heard it so much discussed this week, but I know in some discussions I've had leading up to today as well, in terms of strategy, there is the idea that if we can get a nuclear member to sign on to the TPNW, a NATO member to sign on to the TPNW, this can create the momentum that would be needed to slowly erode the nuclear deterrence of NATO as an alliance and move away from this nuclear alliance global domination of sorts. And one that I've heard discussed among others, and I was at a meeting in Spain a few weeks ago, where Spain seems to be a country that is more open to signing on to the TPNW, and that this could be the beginning of the end of the nuclear alliance.
Yes.
We hope.
Great, thanks. So it is 2:00.
We do have some time we can linger around.
Yeah,
here.
we have more time. We also have
I
food.
want to have people answer the other questions that were asked. So it's like I have them summarized, ready to go. If you don't know them.
Oh, you want to summarize? Okay.
Okay, so yeah, if we have panelists who want to address the youth advisory idea, and how that intersects with all of this and can it have an impact with the UN, and then being aware of personal choices and how to bring that aspect into this. And then Susie was talking about if anyone has any ideas for other mechanisms, how we can break down silos and bring in more human rights discussions into this. So if we want to answer those quickly before we have to wrap up.
Okay, so let's, anybody in Dubai want to answer any of those questions or make a comment? Because we'd love to have you still part of this. I know you're still awake because you're still.
I can also jump in just to share a little bit, everyone. No, I was just putting in the chat here on Zoom as well, that bringing back the phrase again, disarmament for development is something that I think would really help, especially here at COP. And I know many of those who are working on sustainable development, the SDGs are so popular now, but especially bringing back that phrase of disarmament for development and realizing that we need to use those funds, which was already mentioned here today, but really bringing that to break down those silos between the climate action community, that climate finance could be financed with disarmament, using those funds. So that's just another, I think, avenue for bringing the communities together.
Thank you. Anybody else online want to add anything? Rebecca?
I thought I might, sorry, just jump in quickly, and excuse my 11 p.m. brain, but hopefully I can articulate this. But I really appreciated the question around consumer preferences and sort of individual choice. And I think I was just reflecting on that. I think there's a really interesting difference here between the nuclear regime and climate change, where there's actually been an overemphasis on consumer preferences and individual choice, and actually a concerted effort by the fossil fuel industry over many years to put the burden back onto individuals and kind of obfuscate their responsibility for climate change. And there's actually been evidence of BP running, advertising campaigns about individual choices and how it's your responsibility to turn the light switch off, as opposed to fossil fuel companies extracting fossil fuels that are responsible for 86% of carbon dioxide emissions. So I think it's just quite an interesting dynamic where in the climate space, there's been a lot of emphasis on demand, on consumer choices, and very little on the sort of cause of the problem. And perhaps that's a differentiation between the two regimes and something that, to be reflected and kind of balanced against. Not to say that individuals don't have a lot of power and we shouldn't exercise that power when we can, to try and shift the dial.
Thank you. Yes. Anybody else online want to add anything? Katrin, Kuria, Tanyela? No. Anybody here want to add to anything that was? We had one more question. I do want to give people a chance. We can stay here as long as you want, actually, but but I want to give people a chance to finish and go on to their next thing. But you had a question.
Well, a comment, I guess, or
Comment,
maybe
sure.
two comments mixed in with one. First of all, I'm really delighted that we're having this session because I really do see a crossover between nuclear weapons and climate change issues. And one of the crossovers I see, a very strong one, is the whole idea that the people that have the power in the world are trying to maintain the status quo. So if they talk about nuclear deterrence, basically it's saying that's the status quo and there's really no other way that's going to provide security in the world. When it comes to climate change, they say in order to maintain our comfortable way of life, would you want to give that up? Do you truly want to give that up and sacrifice? I don't think so. That's just the way it is. We have to live with the climate and see what happens. It's a status quo type of argument. And I think the response then really does have to be talking about change. And I'm encouraged by this week's discussion at the conference when it talks about humanitarian consequences, because I think these are dire consequences, but it does then speak to a more positive type of world that we really want to aim for. And that, I think that really can be the basis of the argument. So I guess that's where I'm going with this. And the second thing I would say is that I think it's really important to not forget the big P political side of things. The people that have the power also are trying to gain control of governments of this world. And
I'm trying.
in some ways they're very successful, but Brazil is a case where there's positive news now that we have a better government in Brazil than we did. So there are possibilities that we can move that forward. And it's so important. We're Canadians, the two of us here. It's very embarrassing for us at times to be here this week because we are confronted by the Canadian government's non-attendance here. And also the fact that we know when it comes to COP that two of the Canadian premiers from fossil fuel provinces that rely heavily, Alberta and Saskatchewan, they're at COP and are going to be lobbying face-to-face as government leaders saying we need to maintain the status quo. So again, it's a message of change that has to be done.
Right, the message of change that has to be done. That's a good ending point. We are going to continue the conversation tomorrow for anybody that's free at 1:15 in conference room B. We have another event. We're going to be describing the findings from our book that's coming out on Warheads to Windmills, which covers all these issues, including NATO and many other issues are in here, nuclear power and everything. So we're going to be talking about that and giving other people at the MSP a flavor of what went on today. Those delegations who couldn't be here and are interested in helping us make these links. And so thank you all so much for joining us. And thank you all, especially online in Dubai, that have stayed up so late to join us in your hotel rooms or wherever you are. So thanks very much for everybody. Let's have another round of applause.
Thank you. Good luck with your work.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you for organizing.
Yeah, good luck with it all.
Luck with the two MSP.
Thank you.
And there's 10,000 of them now?